Hospitals are supposed to be places of healing. But let me tell you something, when you're inside one at 3 a.m., they feel anything but. I work as a night shift nurse in a city hospital. Been doing it for years. Seen it all. Or so I thought. A couple of weeks ago, I got transferred to a different floor, the abandoned wing. They were remodeling part of the hospital, but some of the rooms still had old patients in them. The ones who couldn't be moved. They needed someone to do rounds there, and since I had the most experience, I got the job. Lucky me. The first night, I didn't notice anything too weird. The lights flickered a little. The air smelled old, like dust and something metallic. The rooms were mostly empty except for the few long-term patients who barely spoke or moved. Then, at 2:37 a.m., I saw something that made my blood run cold. I was walking down the hall, checking on patients when I passed room 409. It was supposed to be empty. The door was cracked open, and inside, in the dim glow of the emergency lights, I saw a figure, a man in a hospital gown. He was facing the window, motionless. I pulled out my chart. No one was assigned to room 409. I stepped inside. "Sir?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. No response. I took a step closer. The air was freezing. My breath came out in white puffs, like I had just stepped into a walk-in freezer. Then the man moved, not like a normal person. His head jerked to the side first, then his shoulders, like his body was remembering how to work. And then he turned to face me. His face was wrong. His mouth was too wide. His eyes were sunken in like he hadn't slept in years. His skin was the color of old wax. And he smiled. Not a normal smile. A stretched, lipless grin that showed far too many teeth. I backed out of the room so fast I almost tripped over my own feet. When I blinked, he was gone. Just gone. I slammed the door shut and pressed my back against it, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear myself think. A sound crackled over the intercom. Static. Then a voice. "Please don't let it in." I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached the nurse's station. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my radio, pressing the button so hard I thought I'd break it. "This is Nurse Carter. I just saw someone in room 409. I need security up here. Now." The response was instant. "Room 409? Are you sure?" Something in the security guard's voice made my stomach twist. "Yes, I'm sure. There was a patient in there, but no one's supposed to be assigned to that room." A long silence. Then finally, "Stay there. We're coming." I leaned against the counter, trying to catch my breath. The halls were dead quiet. That eerie kind of silence you only hear in places that should never be silent. No monitors beeping. No distant sound of patients shifting in their beds. Just nothing. Then I heard it. A dragging sound. Slow, uneven. Like something crawling across the floor. It was coming from around the corner. I swallowed hard. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to lock myself in the supply closet and wait for security. But I had to look. I stepped out from behind the counter and peeked around the corner. The hallway stretched out before me, dimly lit by the flickering fluorescent lights. First, I thought it was empty. Then I saw it. A figure pulling itself along the floor. Not walking, dragging. Its arms were long, too long. Its fingers splayed out like broken twigs. The skin on its hands was blackened and peeling, leaving streaks of something dark and wet smeared across the tiles. Its head was lolling to the side, like its neck was too weak to support it. But then it snapped up, fast and unnatural. It looked right at me, and it grinned. I turned and ran so fast I nearly slammed into the security guard as he stepped out of the stairwell. "What the hell is going on?" he barked. I whirled around, pointing at the hallway. There's something in the hall. It was crawling but the hall was empty. No smears on the floor. No figure. No sound. Just me and the security guard, standing in the quiet glow of the emergency lights. His expression hardened. "Get back to the station. Now." I didn't argue. I sat there, gripping my radio like a lifeline, while the guards swept the floor. They didn't find anything. No patients out of bed. No signs of forced entry. Nothing. At 4 a.m., one of the older nurses, Joanne came in for the next shift. She took one look at me and frowned. "You look like you saw a ghost." I didn't respond. She sighed, setting down her bag. "First night in the abandoned wing, huh?" I nodded. She hesitated, then leaned in and whispered, "You should quit." My heart skipped a beat. "What?" She glanced over her shoulder, making sure no one was listening. "This floor, things happen here. People see things, hear things." I swallowed hard. She lowered her voice even more. "There's a reason this wing is abandoned. I didn't sleep when I got home. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that grin, that broken, twisted body dragging itself across the floor. By the time my next shift rolled around, I had convinced myself I imagined it. A hallucination from exhaustion, stress, maybe even just a prank pulled by some asshole security guard. But deep down, I knew better. I showed up at 7 p.m., and the moment I walked through the staff entrance, Joanne grabbed my arm. "Come with me," she whispered. I barely had time to react before she was dragging me down the hall, away from the other nurses. She pulled me into a break room, shut the door, and locked it. Then she looked me dead in the eye and said, "You saw it, didn't you?" My throat went dry. I don't know what I saw," I stammered. She exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. "Listen to me. You're not crazy. I worked in this hospital for 23 years. This place, it's wrong." I swallowed. "What's wrong with it?" She hesitated. Then, finally, "Room 409. A chill ran down my spine. "It started in the 90s, she continued. "Patients in that room, they didn't just die. They disappeared." My stomach flipped. "What do you mean disappeared?" "I mean gone. Their charts would say they passed, but there were never any bodies. No death certificates. No family members coming to claim them." She leaned in closer. "And the ones who lived, they all said the same thing, that something watched them at night." I felt lightheaded. "They finally shut the room down after a nurse went missing." My breath hitched. "A nurse?" Joanne nodded. "She was doing night rounds, just like you. She went into room 409 at 3 a.m. and never came out. Security footage showed her entering the room, but no one ever saw her leave. No body, no clues, just gone." I couldn't speak. Joanne's grip tightened on my wrist. "I'm telling you this because you need to be careful. You need to stay the hell away from that room." Before I could respond, my radio crackled to life. "Nurse Carter, report to room 409. The break room went silent. Joanne's face drained of color. The radio crackled again. "Nurse Carter, report to room 409. Patient distress." I looked at Joanne. She shook her head violently. "Don't go." But I was a nurse. Someone needed help. And despite every instinct in my body screaming at me to run, I grabbed my chart and walked toward room 409. I made my way down the dimly lit hallway, each step heavier than the last. My radio crackled again. "Nurse Carter, report to room 409 immediately." There was something off about the voice this time. It was too slow, too deliberate, like someone trying to sound human but not quite getting it right. I turned a corner. Room 409 was at the end of the hall. The door was open. The overhead lights flickered. The air felt thick, pressing against my skin like I was moving underwater. I hesitated in the doorway, gripping my chart so tight my fingers ached. The patient, a frail, elderly man named Mr. Higgins, was sitting upright in his bed. His breathing was ragged, his hands trembling in his lap. He looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "It's in the room," he whispered. I felt my stomach drop. I stepped inside, forcing my voice to stay steady. "What's in the room, Mr. Higgins?" His eyes darted past me, over my shoulder, behind me. "I told it I wouldn't look," he rasped. "But it's still here." A chill ran down my spine. I turned to check the monitors, trying to act normal, trying not to show how badly my hands were shaking. Then I heard it, a sound from the corner of the room, like something shifting against the floor, something that wasn't supposed to be there. I didn't turn around. Couldn't. Mr. Higgins sucked in a sharp breath. He was staring at me, eyes wild, pupils blown wide. "Don't look at it." My entire body went rigid. Something moved behind me. I could hear it. The sound of bare feet dragging across the linoleum. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. The lights flickered again. The heart monitor beeped erratically. And then it spoke. Not with a voice. Not exactly. The words formed in my head, like thoughts that weren't mine. "If you turn around, I will take your face." I clenched my jaw so tight I thought my teeth would crack. My pulse thundered in my ears. I kept my eyes locked on Mr. Higgins. His breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. And then, in the dim glow of the monitor's light, I saw his expression shift. His lips trembled. His eyes filled with horror. Whatever was behind me was bending down, getting closer. Mr. Higgins screamed. I bolted. I didn't look back. Couldn't. I ran out of room 409 and down the hall, my vision tunneling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The door slammed shut behind me. I collapsed against the wall, clutching my chest, trying to slow the hammering of my heart. And then I heard the door click, unlocking itself. I turned and ran. I didn't stop running until I reached the nurse's station. My hands were ice cold, my breath ragged. Joanne was still there. The second she saw my face, she knew. "You saw it," she whispered. I shook my head violently. "No, I didn't look. I swear I didn't look." Her face twisted with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, yes, but also pity. "You don't have to look at it," she murmured. "Once you know it's there, it knows you too." A chill ran through my bones. The radio on my hip crackled. "Nurse Carter." I stiffened. The static hissed through the empty station. Then I heard my own voice. "Why did you leave the room?" The blood drained from my face. Joanne snatched the radio from my belt and switched it off, her hands shaking. "You need to leave," she whispered. "Right now." I swallowed hard. I can't just leave my shift." She grabbed my wrist, squeezing tight. "Listen to me. That thing is not just in room 409. If you heard it on the radio, it means it's looking for you." My stomach twisted into knots. "You need to get out of this hospital before..." A crash. Somewhere down the hall. Both of us froze. Joanne's nails dug into my wrist. She didn't speak. Neither did I. The hallway stretched out before us, silent and empty. Then footsteps. Slow, shuffling. Not quite human. I reached for the emergency phone. Dialed security. Nothing. The line was dead. The lights flickered, buzzing like insects trapped in glass. My heart pounded. The footsteps stopped. A breath of cold air moved past my ear. "I found you." My entire body went numb. Joanne yanked me backward, nearly pulling me off my feet. She grabbed a ring of keys from her pocket and jammed one into the break room door. "Inside," she hissed. I didn't argue. The second we were in, she slammed the door shut and locked it. I pressed my ear against the wood, barely breathing. Silence. Then, a soft tapping on the other side. 1, 2, 3. Slow. Deliberate. Joanne was already pulling out a notepad, scribbling something in frantic, jagged strokes. She ripped out the page and shoved it into my hands. "Do not speak. Do not open the door. Do not look at it." A shadow passed under the doorframe. The lights in the break room flickered, and then the doorknob started to turn. The doorknob twisted slowly. Deliberately, I pressed myself against the far wall, gripping Joanne's note so tight the paper crumpled in my hands. She held up one finger to her lips. "Do not speak." The doorknob rattled harder. The lights flickered again, buzzing angrily. Then silence. Joanne and I stood frozen, barely daring to breathe. I glanced at her. She was staring at the door, her entire body tense. Then we heard it. A voice. "Joanne." My stomach twisted into knots. The voice was deep, gravelly wrong. And the worst part? It sounded just like me. Joanne's fingers dug into my arm, her nails sharp against my skin. "Joanne, open the door." My own voice, just on the other side of the wood. A breathy chuckle followed, low and wet. I squeezed my eyes shut. This isn't real. This isn't happening. Then tapping on the door. 1, 2, 3, just like before. But this time, something pressed against the wood. A shape, tall, thin. Something was leaning against the door. Listening. Waiting. Joanne grabbed my wrist and scribbled something else on the notepad. She held it up. It knows our names. Can sound like US. I felt my blood run cold. A long, heavy breath dragged through the crack beneath the door. Then, in a voice so soft I almost didn't hear it, "What do I look like?" I clamped a hand over my mouth. My lungs burned from holding my breath. The thing on the other side of the door laughed. Slow. Dragging. Like something that had never laughed before and was trying it for the first time. Then silence. We waited. Minutes. Nothing. Finally, Joanne nodded toward the door and mouthed, "Gone." I didn't believe her, but I had to check. I stepped forward, heart hammering. Pressed my ear against the door. Silence. Joanne unlocked it carefully. Cracked it open an inch. Nothing. The hallway was empty. The lights had stopped flickering. The air was still. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Then we heard the intercom crackle to life. Code white. Room 409. I turned to Joanne. Her face was pale. Another burst of static. Then a voice. "Carter. Jen, we see you." The intercom screeched. The hallway lights blew out. And somewhere down the corridor, something started running toward us. The footsteps came fast. Too fast. Whatever was in that hallway, it was running straight for us. Joanne didn't hesitate. She grabbed my wrist and yanked me down the opposite corridor. "Stairs," she gasped. "We have to get to the stairs." I couldn't think. I could barely breathe. My body was moving on instinct, my legs burning as we sprinted past empty hospital rooms and flickering exit signs. Behind us, the footsteps never slowed. And then I made the mistake of looking over my shoulder. I only saw it for a second, but that was enough. A shape too tall and wrong, its limbs moving too fluidly for something human. It didn't have a face, just a smooth, blank stretch of skin where its features should have been. But somehow, even without eyes, I knew it was looking at me. It ran on all fours, its body twitching and convulsing with every movement. And then it opened its mouth. Not a normal mouth. A wide, gaping hole that stretched from its forehead to its chest. And inside, there were faces. Not one, dozens. Flickering in and out like a broken film reel. My face. Joanne's face. The faces of people I didn't even know. And they were all screaming. I turned away before I could see more. The stairwell door was just ahead. Joanne shoved it open and we practically threw ourselves inside. We slammed it shut behind us, locking it just as something crashed into the other side. The metal door buckled inward. It hit the door again, and again. Each impact shook the walls. I gripped the railing, my head spinning. What the hell is that thing? Joanne was already running down the stairs. "It's been here for years," she hissed. "It wears people. If you look at it, if you hear it, it knows you." Another crash. The door started to bend outward. Joanne grabbed my wrist again. "We don't have much time." We ran. Down the stairwell, past floors that should have been full of people, but were eerily empty. My ears buzzed with static. The intercoms were still on, whispering broken, garbled sentences. "We see you." And then I heard my own voice. "Where are you going, Carter?" I squeezed my eyes shut. It wasn't real. It wasn't real. We reached the ground floor. Joanne burst through the emergency exit, dragging me into the cold night air. The second our feet hit the pavement, the hospital went silent. No more whispers. No more static. I turned back, chest heaving. The windows on the 4th floor, ***, the abandoned wing, ***, were pitch black. But in one of them, I saw a shadow, standing perfectly still, watching, waiting. I swallowed hard and turned away. Joanne was already digging into her pocket, pressing a set of car keys into my hands. "You're leaving," she said. "Now." I blinked. "What?" Her expression was grim. "You don't get it, do you?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You left the hospital." But it didn't. A chill ran through my spine. If you go home, if you go anywhere alone, it'll find you. It's inside you now. My breath hitched. You have to leave town, she whispered. Now, before it gets stronger. I wanted to argue. I wanted to believe none of this was real. But I couldn't, because when I turned back to the hospital one last time, the figure in the window was gone. And somewhere, deep in the back of my mind, I swore I heard my own voice whisper, "I found you."